right, so we've reached the last part of our design system series. Our design system isn't huge, it's small. It could use some more components and a lot of things, but carrying on, we want to talk about documentation. It's a huge topic. Instead of just trying to sit here and go through the sort of like mundanity of documenting each thing out here, I just kind of want to talk about more high-level concepts, share a bunch of files that can help, as well as some videos, some resources that I think would actually do better justice for this hour. And then of course, we'll try to have time for Q&A, as opposed to just sitting there and be like, this is how I'm going to type in this text field the whole time. Anyway, let's jump on in. All right, so let's get back here. Let's get back to our style guide. Now, not a lot has changed since we last had our wonderful times together. We've got a bunch of pages that have different types of elements on them, like dialogue elements or form elements. Now, these elements, there's a lot more work to be done in this design system, probably meaning I need to take all these text fields out and break them out into their own page, and probably all my buttons, button bars. Let me zoom in here. Buttons, button bars, anything to do with a button, smaller buttons, big buttons, little buttons. All of those probably need to live in their own place. And then toggles and checkboxes and popovers and anything that's going to be a dialogue element that's going to pop up should probably be on its own page. We're not going to go into that today because that's a little bit of just more mundane, and we're going to get into talking about, once it's time to publish this, what do we do and how do we document this out? What are some assets that we have? And basically, what's some good ability in Figma? What can we do in Figma? Hold on, a little parched here. Okay, so in Figma, I'm going to start in Figma first and give you some tips and techniques here. And then we're going to move outside of Figma because I totally understand that not all of your design systems are going to be fully housed in Figma. Now, the beautiful thing about Figma is that it is a single source of truth. And so the more text you load in here, all this stuff, people can see this. Viewers, people that aren't necessarily paying, if you know Figma, if you have an editor seat, you'll pay for that license. But as a viewer, all kinds of people, developers, other designers that aren't necessarily working on that file, they can see this. Maybe you're some kind of an agency and you actually have a contractor that you'd like to be able to come in, view your style guide, and build things according to the style guide. This is another great example of somebody that could come in as a viewer to your file and see all this well thought out stuff and like, oh, this is how I place these things. This is my font sizes. This is what I'm going to use for the distances between my elements. So there's definitely a lot that can be done all within Figma. And so I want to start in Figma based on that, and then we'll move out. Anthony, I'm just going to rely on you to be rude and just be like, Raji, shut up. Hey, we got a question. So
we've got something already coming in. I think it's somebody just maybe trying to catch up to also just on some of the things that we have here already. Could you just quickly talk about, so on some of those buttons, you've got link buttons versus button with outliner filled. What's the difference there?
Yeah, so this button here, I've seen this in several patterns for the web. It's basically something that occupies the same button space, but it's just a link text. But that way, when you actually bring it into your design system, it's actually the same exact height, mostly the same hit target, but it looks just like the text. It's just this blue text here. So I've done this before in a few projects, created something called a link button that has the appearance of a link with that blue text, but it's actually not got the borders or anything like that. It doesn't have the hover states of a button. It's not necessarily a standard, but it's something that I built.
Awesome, cool. Awesome. Great question, Jay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is a way that you can actually help your design system to be easier to use. So let's say I'm over here and I've decided after publishing my design system to now use it in a new document. That's the whole goal, right? So what I first did is I actually went out and published my design system. So I dropped down this Dropbox and I published out to my team. The next thing I did is I actually created a brand new file, and let's just go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead into my personal project here, and I'm going to create a new file here. And under the Assets tab, I'm going to bring in that design system. Now I can pull in any design system that I want to that's been published out. Right now I have this built in Figma, 49 components. I can get an idea, oh look, here's all my text styles, and here's everything here. Here's my dialogue components, all that. That's great. That's exactly what I want. I want to be able to enable this. Okay, so now when I want to bring in my assets here, you can see here that I have some names on this, but right now it's just the default name for the component: close, disabled, email, error, resize. Now that may work, but it might not work for everything. Imagine a heart icon that people don't know what it's called. Maybe it's called a favorite in your nomenclature. So one way that we can tackle that is that we can actually come over into our icons. And this is something that I would say, make sure that you utilize in a huge way. Use this component description box and don't let the size of it, don't let it intimidate you. You can definitely hit a bunch of returns and get more space there. Now, what I would recommend doing is coming into each one of these and maybe filling out what search terms you might actually use. I've seen some companies do something like this. They actually put their search terms in parentheses below. So that might be like email, send, submit, newsletter. Maybe these would be your search terms for this. And then these will be indexable. So let's just give this a try really quick. Once I've made a change here, I'm going to hit publish. You can see the things that have been changed. I'm going to go ahead and publish those things. And I'm going to come back to this document here. And I'm just going to try that search out. So what was that thing we put in? What is newsletter? Notice that it brings up this email component. And you can actually see now in this tooltip text, you can see all the other search terms. So my first bit of advice would be definitely utilize this description field as much as you can. But remember, it's not just for search terms. That helps your designers with your design system, but also what else could we do in here? So I've seen a lot of different things like this. So there could be, I've seen a lot of different companies utilize this in very different ways. And Anthony, of course, you can chime in whenever you'd like to. But one way you could do is you could actually indicate like classes. So you could be talking with your developers about like, well, is there an actual class that we have for this? Maybe there is. Let's just say that class name is, and we could even put in here like this, class name, icon, email. Maybe that's your class name there. And that way your developers can search for it, but also when you see this in the code panel, you're also gonna see this. Anybody that sees this component or uses this, a developer that comes into view mode is going to see, icon email. We've already got this. We've already got this in our system. We're gonna go ahead and use that as opposed to coming in here and exporting this as an SVG and bloating your library. There's probably a lot of different ways that you could utilize this component description field too. I'm guessing that you could add all sorts of things in here. I've seen literally IDs in here for like resources. So they actually, there's a video that I'm gonna share with y'all from Thumbtack's design system where they actually reference different IDs. So it could be like, this is an ID of an object within our library, our object library. So they would put in ID and it's probably some MD5 hash that looks like that. But in this way, you can actually fully document out your design system through components here to make it easier. Anthony, any thoughts on this naming thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of, so some of the conventions that we use elsewhere also really shine here. So, I mean, I'm a huge fan of emojis, not just for texting my friends, but they communicate a huge amount of information in a very small space. So if you want to talk to different teams or different team members using a single description field, that's a great opportunity to maybe have an emoji convention for your different audiences. So one thing that we see a lot is like when talking to developers, you'll use like the speed square or the ruler emoji. And then if you want to talk to designers, you're using paintbrush or something like that. So you can really sort of start to group out those different types of description pieces of information. Another really interesting one, and you'll see this if anyone, I'll post a link to the primer, the GitHub primer documentation file. They'll take the concept of the tags themselves. So you've got that email, send, submit, newsletter, and they'll actually, in some respects, merge that with the idea of the class name descriptions. So they'll have multiple sets of things where it might be like button, and then they'll do a semicolon and they'll list off a bunch of important descriptors that also double as keywords. So it's almost like grouping your keywords into like the relevant taxonomies or what you'd use them for. This is getting a little bit more advanced as far as like how you could do that, but some pretty neat techniques with that. That's one of my favorite things to do with it.
Was that example, did you find that in the Primer web file, Anthony?
Yeah. So if you go to like a button in Primer web,
I actually have it ready to share as a good example.
Amazing.
Here we go.
And if you look at that description there, see that button semicolon, BTN, comma, primary, comma, green, what you'll get in some of their other more advanced components, and it might take me a minute to find an example, is that if you have something that is not as related to the button, but maybe you're within a larger component or something like that, you could group those out as well into say, yes, this is button, primary, and green. So those are actually class names that are also being used as tags, but you could then say maybe brand and then have all of the list off the brands that you're supposed to be using this for, right? So if you work at a multi-brand team, like maybe actually the Expedia team does this pretty well. So they actually have a few examples where they'll have their sub brands all just comma separated under a term called brand. So like brand, semicolon, and then sub brand. So again, nothing wildly new here, but really helping to organize that information and group it so that you don't end up with this humongous list of tags that's kind of like tag soup. You're actually keeping it organized as you're doing your descriptions. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing that I do love about this is that when you're building components, you're building them hopefully a limited set of components all in one area, but then the instances of those components where they all reach out to thousands and thousands of files, who knows how far it goes. So I think that when you are documenting your design system, realize that you have such a large hammer to wield here just in this description field, because this instance that I just created of this button, that whole description now lives with it and it moves with it. So this is going to go wherever those instances go. And so it extends your documentation as opposed to saying, oh, make sure you always check that documentation link. It is within the files themselves. And so I think this is something that you should absolutely try to take advantage of whenever you can, documenting out throughout components, icons, everything as much as possible through that component descriptor there. And then also remember your styles, you can also do the same thing. You can also add descriptors to those styles. So let's just take a flamingo, for example, here, this color. This is just a horribly it's just a name, but it doesn't have a lot of context. And you could actually add in a description here to say, this is the primary brand color. This is to be used for all CTA elements. And here's the situations in which you would not use this color. It's never to be used for text, etc. Now you can put this on this color style, but also put it within your documentation as well. And we're going to start talking about that here. It's actually documenting on the canvas as well.
Hey, Raji, we got a great question from Michael Carrick about getting back to just some of your components and component sizing. When you're working with like primary and secondary buttons, how do you organize things? So you had those icon examples. How would you organize those for different sizes? Like, would you have small icons and larger icons depending on like what types of things you were using them for?
Yeah, that's a great question, Michael. I think really depending on the project, of course, it depends kind of a situation. But in my mind, probably what I would do is I would have a marketing, a separate, completely separate design system file for marketing. That way it's very clear as the intention. And then when I go into the asset panel and I turn this on, much in the same way that I might enable my colors and then enable my, let's say my mobile styles. Let's say I'm working on mobile native, then I might enable that. In this way, I could actually just enable all of my marketing stuff. So I know I'm working with things that are intended for marketing. As far as the icons go, now I might do that a little bit different because I feel like icons and colors are probably visual language that would be shared throughout. So it'd be shared throughout all of my marketing website, all of my sort of my application, my web app stuff, as well as maybe my mobile native stuff. And this is a shared resource. So I would just publish that as strictly that icon file. And then of course I could put within these icon descriptions here, I could put in icons /24 pixels /X. I could even put in the intention of those things. So if I knew that 24 pixel icons were to only be used for web buttons, then I could just put in icon /web button, whatever it is that I'm looking for. But it really depends on the intent. I would hope that the icons you wouldn't have to like repeat for every specific platform, and maybe it could be a shared visual language.
Got it. Yeah. And in fact, there's actually another great example of exactly just what you were talking about. I'm dropping it in the channel right now. The primer, the same team that does the the components file, they also have all the octagons separated out into a separate file. You'll see pages for 16 pixel and pages for 24 pixel. Again, we're not just talking size distance here. We're talking different visual treatment and communication based, so that it's actually visually pleasing at those sizes. So.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so and just to hit a quick question, Jay Hilton asked, is it not best practice to export all icons as SVGs? I would imagine so. I would imagine so. It really depends on the platform that's using it, but I would imagine, unless there's some wild effects in those icons, probably just exporting them as XVGs is the right way to go. Now, of course, this is always going to be a conversation with your developer, because you never know. Maybe people are still using SVG sprite sheets. I'm not sure. It's essentially a huge SVG document that contains all of your icons and then sort of picks out the one based off of your usage. I'm not sure if we're doing that anymore, but once again, a conversation with your developers to see how those should be exported.
And one cool little note about that in Figma in particular, as a designer, you can actually set up the exports for all these icons in your design system file. So if you go in and you say, add new export, that export will be set up by the designer, which is always great. And then as a developer, so a viewer, if you only got a view account and you come into that file, there's a command that if you run from the menu called export, which will actually bring up a, if you just run the, in fact, Roger, I think if you just go to the file menu and hit export real quick, it'll actually pull up a menu, an export menu of all of the things that have been set up for export, which is great.
Yeah, so what I wanted to show you is, this is great because I was going to show you this next. This is a view only, so I've loaded in what a developer might see. Right now, as soon as I come to the document, you see here it says view only, and now I can come in and I can select this icon here, but you can see that it's already been set up for a 1x SVG export here, as well as if I go here, this has been set up in a different way. Obviously, the designer actually set up the exports for me as SVG and ping for some reason, but I can go ahead and use those as a developer now. Now, what Anthony was saying, Anthony, you want to continue on that one?
Sure, yeah. If you run, so there's a great command from the menu. So before we even get to the developer doing this, but like you go to the menu and just hit export, if you type in export and from the menu command, right. So in the search bar, go export, that last one, the ... this is going to give you an awesome little menu that's actually going to show you every export that's already been set up. So you'll see what the designers have sort of prescribed as things that should be exportable or ready for export. And then I think the last part that Roger was about to show, which is that I, as a designer, am also very guilty of forgetting to set up my exports for developers from time to time. And then you get that nice back and forth with your developer, and they're like, hey, this icon is not here, it's not available. Even as a developer in a view-only mode, you can set up your own exports by clicking on any of these items and just adding an export if you need it. So that's nice to just be able to know that you actually have that power yourself too.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, so this is great. Remember I'm in development view or view only view. I can now see all of this information that we put in that description now communicated to me. So I can get cues as to know, maybe it's a color and I have a comment on that color to let me know what to use that for, or what class name it aligns with in the design system as well. So yeah, that's great. Good call on that one, man. All right. So I wanted to show a few files as well, just to show what good documentation might look like. And then I also wanted to share like what happens when you move outside of Figma for documentation and what you might do in that scenario. So let's keep it within Figma for right now. And I'm going to go ahead and just share a few links out. So here is a Figma file here for a documentation kit. We'll go ahead and go with this dark mode one. So, and hopefully soon, our community beta will be available for you all to take advantage of all these things. Now, these links that I'm posting to you should still work. So let's go ahead and search here. I'm going to put in doc kit dark mode. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. These are going to be just a few assets that can help you on your way. So as soon as we need to start documenting our design systems, just those description boxes aren't going to be enough. I feel like you're going to need a kit, something to be able to help you express different spacings between things. Now this kit's pretty cool because I can actually take these components here. If I wanted to, I could actually publish this as a library. That way I can maintain all my component connections. And then you can see here some good examples of how you can use this kit. So I can use this to actually express spacing between objects. I can use this to express gutters and padding and stuff like that. So the fine folks at Tetrisly have set this all up so you can actually put in avatars or updates and notes within your system to say, hey, this is what I updated. This is what's new. And you can see here that there's all kinds of different options here and different examples on how you might use this, how you can use these sort of permanent annotations within your design system. Lots of different things to be able to help out with this thing. Notice these are all well thought out. So if I wanted to use this arrow, notice it all works out really well with constraints so that I can actually point to different things within my file and I can actually document the usage. Looks like we've even got some things we could potentially use as like touch target stuff and talking about like maybe when we're scrolling or when we're dragging on an element. Lots of great things. Not going to go too much into that, but just to let you know that there's lots of different things here that you can use and little utilities that can help you on your way. All right, let's get into the next resource. That way we keep them coming for you. All right, here's another one. This one's called Documentation Cards and Buttons. I'm going to put it in here. This one can help you on your way as well. Let's go ahead and look for it here in the community beta. Cards and buttons. All right, this one's by Remy Majuji. And Remy, if you're here, I'm so sorry if I butchered your name. But this one has a lot of other really cool things that you can use. These are actually set up for linking. For those of you that know, you can actually, or don't know, you can actually have a link within Figma that goes off to something else. This is a super big win for documentation and design systems. But Remy set up all of these different buttons here. So you can actually say, hey, here's a Jira task for this thing, or here's some more data on this in Google Sheets or whatever. Got a lot of great little handy icons that we can use here. All sorts of things, GitHub links. Let's say your documentation's on GitHub, or you have more code references on GitHub. This is all going to be really great, as well as little cards here, all pre-thought out for you. And you can go ahead and use these cards to decorate your design system Figma file and create some more context here for your users. All right, on to the next.
That one's great.
Yeah, that one's really cool.
Yeah, I love that. Wanted to just touch on we had a couple other quick questions just on the CSS styles, and I just wanted to make sure we got to those while we were still kind of near that. So one of the questions that came in, Samantha was saying, can you export all of your CSS styles as one style sheet? And I can actually mention, and I'll drop into the channel, a couple of plugins that will help to do this. So what they'll do is they'll generate a giant file of either HTML, either CSS, HTML plus CSS, or SAS or SCSS as well. I'll drop those into the channel. Keep in mind that when you're doing the entire file, that means any and all things that are on your page are going to be generated as styles. So you might have to do some pruning when you're done. That may or may not be the approach you want to take, but yeah, that does exist. And letting viewers not actually be able to, we had another question from James come in around locking users from being able to actually export SVGs. That is a great idea. I can see a lot of use cases as to why that would be pretty valuable, especially if you've got some pretty hard and fast processes and you don't want developers running off creating their own SVGs.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's awesome. So curious about that plugin. The plugin that you're going to share is about exporting everything. Is that right? All of your styles on a file?
You can get all of your styles at once. So there's a few plugins. One's called Structure. I'll drop it into the channel, which will basically generate both HTML and CSS. Again, you know, like as a realist here, I would question the stability of a plugin that's generating that kind of HTML, but keep in mind it's at least going to give you some structure to start with or to work with, right? But again, if you're going to go in and refactor and optimize, that's a great approach. I may be careful, or at least just, make sure that you're testing it if you're just going to use that HTML directly. As for somebody who's worked with these kinds of no code or one-click solutions, there always tends to be some things that you might want to watch out for. So just keep an eye on that. But then you'll see that you'll also be able to grab all of the SAS for that as well, also in SCSS format too. So.
Okay, great. I have not used structures, so let us know what y'all think of it. Hopefully that really helps you, Samantha. Okay, so the next one I'm going to share here is one called Annotation Kit. And this is going to be great for when comments don't do enough. And I love comments for when you're iterating a design. So you have somebody coming in, say it's a PM or say it's somebody else that has some commentary on your designs. I love the fact that somebody can come in and say, hey, like, can you change this color here? Or can you up the typography on this? This doesn't seem to be matching our system. And I love the fact that you can resolve those things. But when it needs to be a little bit more permanent and it kind of needs to live with the document, I hate the fact that that comments layer is sort of in a different mode. I want to be able to see all this documentation right on the screen. So let me go ahead and just post here an annotation kit link for you all. And I'm just going to explain really quickly what it is. But once again, I want you to have as many resources as possible. So this is essentially what it does. It's similar to what we looked at last. It's just another tool in your toolbox. It's got components that are resizable for creating little arrows, little annotations that you can add to your design, as well as you can have different colored sticky notes to be able to document things out, or have people maybe it's an engineer that comes in and says, I want to be able to add this sticky note so that I can say, like, use this component in React always for this, etc. So anyways, this gives you a bunch of different sticky notes and things that you can add to your design system. Examples of usage, do this or don't do that. There's not a lot to this, but it is a nice kit that you can go ahead and use and get started with right away. Right, let's keep on moving on.
I personally love the built-in one that the team at Figma has, our own helper kit that we use. And one day a picture of Will Smith just giving this nice little over here is the best thing I've ever seen. We added that to our kit. So keep in mind, you can keep it fun. I enjoy it.
Absolutely. Share that one if you can, man. Share that one if you can. That would be great. All right. And I think that'll be it for some of the files. I'll share one plugin. I messed around with it. I've noticed that people have used this before. It's called Redlines, and it's for setting up those little lines around your like spacing, margin, that kind of a thing around your design system, and communicating those things out. I used it. I know people have really ranted about it. I'll share it. I feel like there's still quite a bit more that I would need it to do, but I felt like it was a good idea to bring it in here. So let's go ahead and just run that plugin. All right, let's say we're running it on this dialog box here, and we want to communicate like, this is the width of my dialog box. What I could do is Command/ or Control/ will open this quick menu here, and I can type in Redlines because I've already installed that plugin. And here you can see in the plugin, you can see some different things. It'll automatically apply those measuring lines, a lot like those systems that we saw. So let's say I want one underneath it in this case. If I just click it, it'll actually create that little red line or whatever color I tell it to be. And I can actually give it more spacing to space away from this. Please do not hand slap me. I know it's 641 and it should be 640. But it's a cool utility. If you'd like, you could actually use different units like rems or whatever. Maybe you're not using just pixels for your designs. You can actually put that in here as well. And there's different styles of things. You can actually use this to indicate like the actual, the whole unit here, or you can actually have like a dotted line. There's lots of different things you can use here. Like I said, I still feel like there's a lot more work to be done, but if you find that handy, there it is for you, so you can enjoy it. Yes, Pervi has a great question, and I would love to jump into that. Let's go ahead and do that. One thing I want to share with you, this stream is not going to be enough, but I've been shared this file that's actually a recording. So you have to actually register for this. Just put your email in the box. But it's this really great recording from one of our designer advocates, Tom Lowry and John Kerwin, who's the design system manager at Thumbtack. and they go through their whole, like all their file. And it's like, it's kind of eye candy. Like you can see exactly how he's organized every single thing, and he walks through the whole thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop that here. That's Thumbtack's design system. There it is. And all you have to do is just put your email in to start watching that video. But that one is great. It's fantastic and a really great resource. I watched a bunch of it this weekend. I really, really loved it. And then lastly, another link from our own blog, which is just about naming components and styles and documenting that it's already written. So I am just going to share it with you. All right. All right, so moving on to the next portion of this, what I'd love to share with you guys now is, what if your documentation now is outside of Figma? Like, what if you really need multiple authors and you don't want to do it all in Figma? Let's say you use, we'll start with the simplest here. Let's say you use like maybe a Notion doc. And I want to give you an example of how you might actually work with that. Like I said, I have
quickly. Oh, while you're getting
go
that
ahead, buddy. Go ahead. Yeah, I'll set it up.
Earlier in the channel too, I also dropped John Kerwin's talk from our config conference earlier this year. It's going to be a little bit of context that helps sort of set the stage for that design system Zoom link recording that Raji shared. So it's a little bit more of some of the whys behind what they did and things like that. So
cool. Okay, so let me see if I can squeeze this all into a screen, because I have so many little examples that I've worked out for you, because I know you all have like such probably unique scenarios in which you're documenting these things out. Okay, so let's say this is your documentation. You're a Notion master, and you're gonna be putting all the documentation in Notion. I think the biggest thing that I can say would be such a great ability is Figma embeds. And if you're not familiar with those, let's just do a simple example. Let's say we really want to talk about this dialog box, and we want to say more about the usage of it. Now, what I can do is just right click here. And if I go to simply copy link here, it's copying the link to that frame. Now check how cool this is. As soon as I paste this into Notion, I can embed Figma. Now, check this out. It's actually got my dialog box and only my dialog box there. I can also resize this thing if I'd like it to be a little bit larger. And I can just talk about the dialog box in and of itself here, which is awesome. Now, let's go one level further. Now, this also works like in Paper. Paper has the same thing. So Dropbox Paper, notice I just dumped that in. I'm not sure why we have a hatched background here, but I'll figure that out. It's a render thing. But let's say I want to put in my icons here in my icon set. I can simply come over to my icons. Once again, copy, paste, copy this as a link, put in my icons here. Now, this is a live file. This is a live embed. So that means as I add icons to this, this will update. So I can put all my documentation in here and have these embeds pointing to little areas of my Figma file, and maybe have my documentation here. Now, one other thing that I would love to give you an example of is, I think a design system shouldn't just only be all these static graphics. Like in Figma, we're prototyping, we're animating, we have a lot of like subtlety. And now in Figma, if you haven't noticed, and I would love to show you this, is the fact that if we do an on-click interaction here, and we're trying to show how these dialog boxes appear, what's that animation look like? So let's just hit play on this prototype to see what that might look like. Boom, I've got this show modal. Oh, cool, it like animates in from the top. Great, oh, I even have this like that button there that, oh, okay, now I get a little bit more of an idea of how this interaction works. But also in Figma now we have like custom easing curves. So I actually used a custom easing curve for this. Now let's say all this magic that I just put into this single source of truth file, I really want for a developer to kind of see and feel it instead of having to go off to my Figma file, then hit my prototype, try this out. I can come on in here and I can actually go to options and I can say, all right, I want this to scale up or down to fill. And then I can actually say like, hey, maybe remove some of these things like the toolbar and all of these things, which I just lost it. So I can always hit command / to bring it back, or command dot to bring it back. but I can actually turn off all these things. Now remember that when I'm actually turning off or on these settings, so say I don't want hotspots there, and say I don't want my toolbar and footer, this share prototype, I can actually embed this too. So let's go back to that Notion doc here. And let's say we've got something here that's like the dialogue. And I want to talk about like how it works. I can actually just embed this right into Figma. Now, when I copied that share link, it embedded all of my properties. So I don't have the toolbar and all this stuff. I've just got this. Now I can, of course, do this here. Now in my documentation, I'm able to actually showcase what this looks like and how it works. So I think this is another great and brilliant example of how you can use this. Of course, you can embed this here. You can embed this here within Paper. So Notion, Paper, whatever, they both have embeds. I tried Google Docs. Anthony, any luck there? I couldn't get it to work. Can you embed?
I'm still struggling with that one myself. So it's important to note that a couple of these apps are actually doing a little bit of interesting integration with us just to make sure that we're fully supported and all that kind of stuff. So particularly things like Notion, you're going to get a nice clean experience. Your mileage may vary with some of the newer ones. For the question in the chat, the Confluence or Jira, there is a Jira plugin for this automatically. So if you just go to the Jira marketplace, you'll be able to find it there. It now also supports both this style of like targeted link embedding where you just get the single isolated experience, but you can also get the full embed experience where you can actually cycle through all the pages if you want to have like an overview or like a Confluence doc overview, something like that. So we got actually a great question coming in. Specifically, this is from Jan or Jan. Apologies with the names. Question: is there any way to see the animation settings right now? Either as a developer, like in the view only mode, can I actually pull those up? To the best of my ability, that is something that we are still working on, and we are going to be pushing out something pretty cool for that pretty soon. But I don't know, maybe Raji, if you know any more than I do.
Also, I don't know any more than that. I was going to say that seems to be a current limitation that we have in being able to export those code settings from the prototype here. So I think my answer is no, but I'm going to do a little bit of research on that as well and see if I can come up with any better answers to that question. But to my last remembrance, we didn't have that ability. But also remember that when you are creating these examples, you could list out some of those properties here. And then when, of course, you actually link to this frame, you could show all of that. So you won't necessarily have to show the working prototype. You could actually have a button in here that has a link, and that link goes off to the working prototype. So it could say, hey, check out the interaction for this thing, but then it could also have all sorts of documentation down here using whatever documentation kit you're using. You know, say it's got like a bunch of notes here that's like, make sure the easing is this, make sure the background color is set to these things. You can, of course, bring those in this way and then copy a link to this whole thing and put that in your documentation. And it looks like
Awesome.
Steve said, would you embed only a couple iframes per page so it wouldn't take us too long to render all the iframes? I'm not sure if there's any sort of like lazy loading going on with these things, but I did personally try to do an embed of like 18 different ones, and that definitely seemed to lag it out a little bit more. I'm not sure, Anthony, if you've got any mileage on that one, let me know.
Yeah, so there was actually going to be a limitation that extends a little bit beyond Figma, where just that the way that we do embeds is with iframes, as you mentioned there. Every iframe has what's called a request header, which takes up a bit of space and speed of your requests anyways. And so those headers will add up over time as well. So regardless of what you're embedding, the more iframes you embed, the more that's going to take to load and to lag. Now, if you do find yourself in a situation where you have a very discrete set of things that you want to show, you could always pop those into their own Figma file as well, load that as a single embed and have a nice experience. Yeah, or break out into subpages, exactly. Yeah.
That's right. You could also create like a menu component here that had all of your different options and say like, how does the dialogue open? How does the button interactions work? And you have a menu, and then of course to embed that one, and then you create a prototype to go off to each different area. That could be a potential use for you. Jay asked, Notion is not a tool to replace a tool like Zeplin, correct? That is correct. Notion can be used for like documentation, but Zeplin does a whole lot more in the way of assists towards exporting assets. Figma has a lot of those exporting asset and code panel stuff built right in here, Jay. But Zeplin's got a lot more like integrations with like just putting out React code. Notice that here we've got CSS, iOS, and Android. We don't necessarily have a React panel here. So depending on what you're exporting as, Zeplin may be still the right answer for you there.
We got another question that came in from Marie. Sorry, mate. Sorry, my bad. Okay, get my glasses closer. Mate, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Can you link to multiple prototypes on the same page? Or is the URL always going to be the same?
So via what I was saying, I'm going to go with Maite for your name. Right now, we have a relationship of 1 page per prototype. Now, you can kind of mess with that a little bit by creating a menu page here. So if I go to prototype mode and I move my playhead over here, that'll be my start frame. Another way that I could achieve that same thing would be to come here, starting frame, just clicking on the canvas, prototype mode, starting frame, and move it over to here. Let's just call this menu so I actually know what it's called, which is exactly why I used this visual thing to move it here. Okay, so let's just say we have a couple of different things here. And we're like, oh, we want to dialogue elements, and then we want to do another menu item here would be like a popover. Maybe those are 2 examples that we have. Here we could then drag this to the dialogue. And then on the second one here, we could actually drag the popover to this one here. And it could be something like, hey, show popover. And of course, on this prototype, let's say we want to bring in this popover here. And we want it to, oh, you're going to get a little bit of a tutorial here. Let's get rid of this on drag, and we're just going to have an on click. I'm going to bring that here. We're going to say on click, open overlay. And guess what? We're going to manually position it right over it. Oop, I lost it. All right, great, cool. Let's just say that's going to be great. Let's kill this page and run this prototype. Now you could have this menu page, and it essentially acts like a way to go off to different prototypes. So here's our dialogue. Oh, modal, great. I can hit R to return, and then popover, cool. Oh, that's how the popover works.
You could even set up a cool little backlink as a component if you wanted something where you could just keep reusing your back button to give people access back to the menu.
Without a doubt, yeah, you could actually have interactive examples here. So this is where your elite knowledge of components is going to come into play when you're setting up your design system, because you can actually have this and say, hey, I want it to actually be a header level 2. And then say we have like a back button here, we can actually set up a little back button right here in the UI, and then create this whole element. Let's just call this back. And let's say we created this as a component. Now it's a component. We could then replicate this component to each frame and automatically rig up this backlink to come back here. So we just prototype this one in this master component. We could then link this thing and say, hey, this always goes back to the menu. So on click, navigate to menu. Then of course, when you then duplicate this into the different examples, you could then put in a modal dialogue. Sorry about my auto layoutery. And then of course on this one, you could say popover. But in this way, you've now created a little menuing system for your designers and developers to be able to check these things out and easily get back. So yeah, it's pretty sorry great. About my crappy design, but hey, it was on the fly.
We had one anonymous question come in just around how would you track what is live versus what's being built, and like how do you document these kinds of things? So I guess I'm guessing this is more around the if you've got stuff like maybe you're putting it into Notion or you're just sharing out these prototypes, how do you keep track of what's already built versus what's something that we're trying to build? Any thoughts there?
I have some thoughts, and you might have some as well. First of all, I shared a few of those kits that have little annotations in them. You could use those things here. So you could literally put an annotation next to this text field. And I'm not sure because I don't think I actually have that file open anymore. Oh, let's say this is it. All right, we have notes here. So we could potentially annotate it with a label or something like this. So we could put this label, bring this into our design system, and maybe create a system that says like, this is go. These here are ready for production, or these are not ready for production. Another handy thing that you may use within your design system as well is a plugin called Status Annotations. I'll grab it here for y'all. This is actually a file that you can use, but you can actually use the plugin as well to just dump those things onto the screen for you here. So I'm just gonna put that in for you. But status annotations, you could potentially do something like this by typing in command slash, type in status annotations, and let's run this one here. And I could just annotate this here by saying like, this is ready to develop, or it's approved, whatever. This one wants me to use a top level frame for these things. So maybe what I would do is, if all of these were ready to go, I would say these are approved and the status annotation is there and it's bound to that one. So you can also use this. Now there's a few other, it's a really good question. There's a few other nuances. Anthony actually taught me one of these. So one of these could be like, let's say this multi-line, this one is deprecated now. It lives in our design system, but people can still get it from the assets panel. Meaning when I'm in here in this new website, I can just type in multi-line. I'm not in the design system file, so I'm not seeing those annotations. So when I see this, I just don't know if it's deprecated or I should use it. So a few things that we can do with regards to that. One is going back to our descriptions. We can put in here, you know, deprecated. Use X component instead. Another way that you can do, if you want to be even louder about this, is that you can actually take, and this is Anthony's little idea. I actually rather like this. I've heard other ideas as well, but we can actually take a box and actually put it over this thing. Or I can actually, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that I want to be able to change the color of this thing. So you could actually blur this thing. There's a lot of different ways you could communicate this is no longer to be in use. So let me go away from this, add a new effect, and I could actually add like a layer blur to this and add a text layer on top and say, do not use this unless you're using it for older styles. Then of course, when I publish this thing, they'll see this blurred out version. I could also put a red box over it and have a little note on it and say like, go ahead and disable this layer if you know what you're doing, otherwise don't use this. Anthony, any other thoughts that kind of come to mind for you?
I mean, I'd say that's some of the big ones. We actually have, and I'm locating the link for it right now, a great stream where we went into a bit more depth on some of this stuff in particular. Those are probably the most convenient. Again, as with anything, and you'll hear me beat the drum on this one quite frequently, but the design system is not there to replace the collaboration and the communication between your team. It's there to elevate it. So just ensure that, like, if you're using a tool like Notion as an ancillary tool, try to have some sort of process in place, or at least understanding that, hey, look, if we updated this, we should probably be updating over here. Right? And you can do that either on a cadences of like weekly updates or when you make updates, things like that. So
yes, and in fact, that's a perfect segue for the next thing that I was going to talk about. One last thing to answer the like, what if all of these things on this frame here were deprecated or they're not to be used? You could come up with like a frame background color kind of a situation. So you could say like anything that's on this kind of a color background is actually not to be used, except for, you know, cautionarily. And then of course within the assets, Anthony, let's hope that I'm doing this right, because Anthony also taught me this one. Am I doing this right?
Almost, and this is actually not you. This is something that, so we pushed out a tweet about this recently. There's a little bug right now that we are already getting fixed, which is you have to actually either quickly create another new frame or you have to refresh the file just to sort of trigger an update to the assets panel right now. So if you just quickly just drag and draw out a frame.
Oh, I got it. So if I drag and draw out a frame, let's say,
yeah, that's it.
Okay, so a bug had me. So let's say this text field here is usable and it's like, it's a go. I can have like a light green background color. Then of course, when I come in here, let's see, there it is. I refreshed. So a tip, and Anthony taught me this as well, is you can use these background colors of these frames to actually change back here. Like, so if you have a dark mode UI and you want these things to render in a way that like they're sitting on a dark UI, this could be a cue, but red could also mean it could be a flag, like we're not using these right now, or these are deprecated. So another way of communication. I do have a very exciting thing to share for you. How many of y'all know engineers as a part of your design system? Or that work with your design system? We have nobody. We have one. Okay, great. That's fantastic. Logan, good to know. Okay, so the next thing is that Figma has an API. So one thing to note is if you really truly do want your design system to be the single source of truth, you want to write all documentation and stuff like that within one file and not replicate it into different files. If you've got a pretty engineering savvy team, you can, of course, use the Figma API to pull your design system files and then layer on additional documentation or loop that in and connect it to libraries, etc. So I'm going to give you, hopefully not too mind-numbing of a demonstration of this. Let's see here. I think it's right here. All right. So enter Figma's API. One thing that I've done here is I just added a test API file here. This is just a little miniature file for us to look into and to see the contents that are in here. Now, what's in here is all of my text styles from my bigger design system, but I just kind of limited the objects on the screen here. And I just, as a taste, I've always wanted to nerd out on this, as a taste, wanted to use this to like dump the contents of the file. So if I simply hit get JSON here, this is going to use Figma's API and then grab this JavaScript object notation. Now, the most important thing to note about this for all of you is that like Figma's API allows us to be able to actually see into this file. Notice it's got like icon stuff. It's got all kinds of information. Now that information is a little bit cryptic, but here in this view, you can actually see what it does have. It has components, and notice that the file has 4 different components in there. A text field default. Let's look at what we've got on the screen. Yep, we've got that. We've got active. We've got a button primary, as well as this image square. So these are actual components, and it's syncing with this library. So I could actually take these now and connect them to other documentation sources or CSS libraries or whatever. The other thing that we've got is a whole listing of styles here that are in this document. So we're now able as developers to be able to jump into this file and make some things. So I made something very small for you. And all it really does is it just loops through and gets all the styles and puts them out. So this is a little bit of code right here. It just goes through the Figma file and gets all the styles and then puts like, hey, what's the style type in the name? Let's see what that looks like. And that's what this code is here. We can see that we have a fill, we have a text style for body, effect styles, and all these things. So I just wanted to get this on your radar that this is a fantastic way, if you've got an engineering team, to be able to like use Figma as a single source of truth and then dump all this information and to create more documentation around all of that. Super duper cool. I'm not gonna show you too much more about that because it's all code. And because I have 1 more minute and I wanted to talk about Zeroheight. So Zeroheight is this documentation website, and we have an integration with Figma here. So I can simply just create a style guide on Zeroheight, and let's just call it my style guide. And then they have some basics here, like, oh, what does an introduction look like? Or what are some of the principles, kind of like mantras. But they also have a couple of areas set up for you, like what are our primary colors, our neutral, what is our layout? They even have some like different like sets of documentation here already thought out for you, kind of to get you started. Now, how do we plug Figma into this? So I've never used this, but I was actually quite impressed with this as a tool. If I go here and I go to my profile, you see what's known as uploads. So I'm going to add a new upload. I'm going to use Figma, and I'm going to get my link to my design system. So here we go. I'm going to copy that link. I'm going to put that in, and I'm going to add that file. Whoop, it's already here. Great. Awesome. So we've already done this. Now, if I go back to my style guides and I go to my first style guide, I can actually start bringing in stuff from that. So notice that we've got these actually, I think we were doing my style guide. That's right. If I click add, it'll actually pull from my Figma library. So I can bring a lot of different libraries into this. This is my one design system. Maybe I have my icon library. Maybe I have my color systems. These are all different files. Now I come into here and I say, hey, I want to be able to grab my colors here. So I definitely want this. I want this. Apparently I'm bringing in some other shared things that I don't want to bring. I want to bring in all of these, and I can simply just hit add, and boom, It lists this out with even ability to copy the values out. Fantastic. I can add in my secondary colors. There's a lot here. I can bring in my typography stuff. So if I bring in all my text styles here, boom, let's just see what happens. Great, look, it even gives me previews and uses my fonts and everything. A really cool resource. If you use Zeroheight, like it's got this integration with Figma. I've tested it out as well with those keywords. Let's say we're updating those descriptions or we're updating those export formats. It actually works for those things. So if I come here to my first style guide and I go to my icons, you can see that I actually imported those icons from the file. But now if I actually go to this search icon, notice it's got this little export setting here. Boom, my assets are here. My developer can just simply download all of those if they'd like. And that's based on Figma's export settings. So I think this is an awesome resource and also another way to document out your design system. And this one gives you a bit of an assist. I think we're running close to time, but if we've got a few more questions we can squeak in, let's do it.
Yeah, we've got one that came through around in those embeds that you were showing earlier. Is there a way to actually surface any of the properties there? Is there an inspect mode in these embeds, or are they just for interactions?
Personally, I've never seen one. I messed around with them quite a bit. Anthony, if you can speak to that, but I don't know how to surface the property inspector panel on these.
Yeah, so as far as I know, currently that's the same thing. I believe I saw a plugin at one point that might like spit them out onto a Figma page for you, but then again, you're going to have sort of a little bit of information can become stale pretty quickly if you constantly have to be updating it. So for right now, what you could do is that at the bottom of the embed, there's going to be a link to the file, which you can just pop that open into a new tab, and you've got the inspect view right there. So pretty simple way to get around that.
Yeah, if you don't disable the toolbars on this, like I was doing in that share dialog, you'll see this here, Building Figma Design Systems Documentation. I can just click that link there and it does open that file for me. And then of course, it's based off of my rights and my access to this file. If I'm a developer, I'll just be in that view only mode. And so I'll be able to jump right in. So not bad, it's already got the link in there. Gustavo asked, what use case would I use separate library just for icons? I love that. I love that sort of organization methods. Unless the icons are specifically for a platform, I would love it if the icons could then just be in one specific file and published out for all platforms. I would love it also if the brand colors, same exact thing. Anything brand color that needs to go out to marketing, to your native mobile apps, to your website. I would love it if that was a separate file as well, so I could just turn those on or turn those off.
And then lastly, there was two questions that came in around Storybook integration. There is an actual integration that we have for Storybook. I'm not going to go into the details now, but I'm going to paste our documentation for what we have on that. And basically what happens is that you're going to it's going to be similar to the embed situation, but there's a little bit deeper layer integration where you can actually paste the URL to the Figma links as part of your export parameters. Again, this is probably more on the developer side or getting a little bit more into code, but there's tons of documentation for it too, so I'll paste that here.
Yep, and to reply to JP's question, how did I get my Zeroheight page to link to my Figma file? Just go to your profile, and then there's an upload section in the, there's like a style guides, and then there's an uploads. I know it's not technically an upload, it's kind of a synced to the cloud thing, but that's gonna be where you're gonna find it.
Awesome.
And lastly, I'll hit one last one. Anonymous said, how would you have live demos of components documented? I would absolutely do it through the method that I was showing here, which was coming here and having an examples page. I would probably have a menu page here with all of the different links out to the different interactivity. And in these interactive areas, say they click this to show a modal, I would put some documentation in here. Y'all are designers and you're smart and cool. I'd put some I'd put some documentation here that like expresses, you know, when this should be used, what's the max width for this thing, what's the min width for this thing, and put that all here so that when they come to the demo page, all of that is replicated. And of course, if you need that documentation to also be somewhere else, make it a component. Make it a component and then use an instance of that so you don't have to repeat yourself on those things.
And you can embed those live prototypes in Zeroheight as well. So you can use both the Zeroheight plugin, but also embed live prototypes to have those examples in Zeroheight too.
Oh yeah, we didn't even talk about that. So Zeroheight has an embeddable feature as well. I can just drop that right in. I believe I saw that as well, Anthony. There's a little ability to embed code there. And so that's another great way to put your examples in. Thanks everyone for the great questions. I know there's still more questions and this is such a huge, huge, huge topic. Thank you so much for just coming in and I hope you got something out of this, especially those links. Once again, I'm gonna share one last thing and I don't want y'all to miss this one. I found this to be so valuable. It's that Zoom session with John Kerwin from Thumbtack. I just like the way that he thinks about setting up the design system, how he kind of gatekeeps it and how he makes sure that it doesn't get out of hand. So here's that link one more time. If you have the time, hit it up. Probably much better than what you saw today. So thanks so much everyone for coming. Anthony, dude, thanks for coming in.
Glad I could help out, Raji. Thanks for having me.
All right, y'all are awesome. Till next time, we'll see you later.